AIP, American International Pictures, the independent studio that gave baby boomers glorious monsters, made drive-ins the place to be, took viewers to the beach, and gave us double features of movie mayhem. It also turned Roger Corman and monster suit maker Paul Blaisdell into fandom icons. It conquered the world. The she-creature, Voodoo Woman, the beast with a million eyes, I Was a Teenage Werewolf, Invasion of the Saucer Men, The Amazing Colossal Man, The Spider, Bucket of Blood, The Pit and the Pendulum. Well, you know the titles. All featuring fabulous, garish poster art, up-and-coming stars and directors, and monsters, madmen, and just enough sex to keep the teens happy. After bringing Christopher Lee to Fanex Monster Rally, as well as an amazing guest lineup that will never be seen again, Gary and Sue Svehla wondered how they could top it. So they set about bringing Roger Corman and Sam Arkhoff together. When Sam and Roger saw each other for the first time, well, there were a lot of misty eyes in the crowd. The funniest thing was Arkhoff's amazement at the value of his movie posters. He was very pleased and told us he had lots of them at home. When Samuel Z. Arkhoff was presented the Laemmle Award, he insisted on walking on stage for it, even though he used a wheelchair. The energy of the attendees was a palpable mixture of happiness and pleasant childhood memories as they watched the men who created those low-budget, rubber-suited monster movies of the 1950s and 60s glory days receive a standing ovation and heartfelt thanks from the people who truly appreciated and loved their films, the fans. We were so honored to bring Sam and Roger back together. It is a moment we will never forget.
Ladies and gentlemen, the legendary head of the legendary American International Pictures, Mr. Samuel Z. Arkhoff.
Thank you very much. I want you to know, though, that I haven't retired, and I'm not retiring. It so happens, as a matter of, at the moment, I and my son Lou are remaking 10 of the horror pictures we made before. It offers a great opportunity, really, because the effects are so much better than they were, and of course a hell of a lot more expensive than they were. In fact, they're too damned expensive and sometimes a little ridiculous. My daughter Donna made
The Haunting? The Haunting?
The Haunting, you see. And she and her partner have made about 5 or 6 pictures now. But Spielberg and the director, in many respects, hindered them as producers. They developed the project from another project. And it became, in my opinion, a very good picture, but just too damn much special effects that really didn't join the story. And that's one of the biggest problems that I see happening now with this awe and reverence for special effects. They have their purpose. Now we're remaking a picture, X the Man with the X-ray Eyes. This picture really lends itself to being remade because of the fact that the special effects that you would need were not usable at the particular time that picture was made. But in any event, let's go back to the beginning on this. My good friend Roger Corman just departed, as you know, of course. He and I made about 30 pictures together. One thing is that for an infant company with very little money, Roger was a godsend, because he couldn't tolerate the waste of a single dollar. Roger had cheap jeans, thank God. Thank God. I used to remember that when he would go off on a picture, and we'd see the rushes a few days later, and I would have to call him. I'd say, Roger, the stuff looks good, but for God's sakes, extras are cheap. Put extras in the background. But Roger has done very well for himself. And we, of course, encouraged not only Roger, but Francis Coppola did his first picture for us. Dementia 13, was that the one?
That was one of them.
Scorsese did his first picture for us. Boxcar Bertha. Cher did her first picture long before she became really well known as a singer, in Chastity, which, as a matter of fact, became the name of their child. So we've done a great many things to a great many people. Woody Allen, who at the time was a writer for the Show of Shows, and you finally got a few minutes that they would let him have some witticisms on the stage, that was for the TV. He came to us and he had this Japanese picture. And he had the idea that nobody had thought of before, really, of taking all the dialogue out and making it humorous dialogue. And that became What's Up, Tiger Lily, which, oddly enough, was appreciated by the young people, but was a failure with the older people, until he came along with some of his more standard type of comedies. So it's been a hell of a 40 years or whatever it is. One of the things that struck me about it, as I watch what is happening to the motion picture game, that is different than what it was when I started. And there was a lot of it before I started. And I came along with Jim Nicholson and Roger Corman and all those others in the 50s. And at that time, there were really practically no independents. I mean, Sam Goldwyn made a picture every 2 or 3 years, but he wasn't really an independent in a sense. And there were practically the only independents were motion pictures or cowboy motion pictures, where they would make the same script with the same people with two different titles, slightly two different stories. And they would make them for $25,000 apiece. And we came along with the idea of doing it differently. I first got interested in motion pictures when I was 14. I went to Chicago. I lived in a little town in Iowa, Fort Dodge, and there was an excursion to Chicago where I had relatives to stay with. And every day, my aunt would count out silver from a pushka, and we would go off to the World's Fair where Sally Rand was waving those one fans around, and she really never showed much. You never would get by today with what she showed. But we didn't go there every day, because I was 14 and my cousins were about 20, and they would take me to the burlesque houses in Chicago instead. And I can remember in those days, the blood was different. I could hardly wait for the comics to go off so the girls would come on, whereas I noticed later on when I was representing Abbott of Abbott and Costello, and Abbott had a nightclub with disrobing, that I could hardly wait until the girls went off and the comics came on. It shows a difference in age, I suppose. But anyway, getting back to the subject, I was in television at a time when it was really new. My background for that was that in the Air Force, I was a cryptographer in the Second World War. And I went overseas in civilian clothes because the Azores were a neutral country. And finally, after the Second Front, when it had been won, the American Air Force came over, and everybody put on his uniform again. And the fellow that came over was a fellow also by name Hank McCune, who'd been in radio in the States and who had the idea about television. I remember talking to him and helping him put on a soldier show, which was called APO Zoot. And I had to get 50 Air Force uniforms and alter them to get it, and damn near got court-martialed for doing that. When I got Hank and myself out of court-martial, when I came to LA after the year and entered law school, he wanted to go ahead with television, and he figured I was the proper guy because I'd shown great initiative, and also I'd work free. I think the free was really the commanding reason. And he figured that since I was in law school, I could do all the legal work. Of course, I just started law school. So while I was in law school, and it was an accelerated course given only to veterans, 80 veteran males, no females in that first class at Loyola. This is another case of the Jesuit Jew. I was the Jew, of course, and they were the Jesuits. And so we got to making television shows. Now this is going back to the really beginnings of television, which were mostly kinescope in those days. And Hank's idea was to do them on 16 millimeter film, and they would last longer and reproduce better. So that's what we did. And we started a great many people in the days when we would make a show for syndication, although nobody called it syndication. The television stations were just popping up, and so for about $1,000, we would get 16 millimeter film, and we would get actors, cinema actors that wanted to get their feet wet in television for nothing. We would get writers that were ready to start, and I didn't take any money because I didn't have to. I was going to law school on the Bill of Rights as a veteran, and my wife was working, and really, so it didn't bother me that I wasn't getting paid any money. So we started, and we were making these pictures, these 30-minute films, for approximately $1,000 in actual cash. We had to buy some 16 millimeter film and get it developed. And everybody else would when the union got after us, we would pay them and stand in line and get the checks back. But in a couple years after that, we managed to sell the TV to Mounds and Almond Joy candy bars, and we got on the network. We were one of the first network shows on NBC, and we got $5,500 then to make a half-hour TV show. Today, you can't make a TV show for less than $250,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 or more. The one thing that I will say in those days is that we used ingenuity instead of money. Now they're so goddamn busy throwing money at the screen that prices are absolutely ridiculous. But that's the way things go. As far as pictures are concerned, the strange part about it is it was just waiting to change. Cinemas had been very successful during the war because it was the only one form of entertainment. And the theater owners grew rich sitting on their ass mostly. And by the end of the war, the downtown theaters were dirty, the toilets were unclean, they didn't spend any money, and they made a lot of money. And so what happened is that television came along, and what happened is that other things happened at the same time. For example, the developments in the countryside, next to big cities, where smaller towns became bigger parts of the city, and the theaters went to hell. As a consequence, I looked on the scene after having been in television, and I thought, this is the time to get in and make pictures. The only problem was we didn't have any money, or not much. So we decided to make inexpensive pictures because we were making television so cheap, we knew we could make pictures cheap. So we had problems, of course, with the major companies. And it was about that time that certain things happened that were of great significance to the business. Number one, the antitrust cases that forced the separation of production and exhibition. Secondly, the making available funds in FHA and veterans for them to build new villages on the sites near big cities where there weren't theaters, or if there were, or very few theaters. Third was the fact that the big companies were not really progressive. So we came along, and I was a picture buff, still am a picture buff. That's really why I've been in the picture business. And I used to run their pictures, which I would get with our company because of the fact that while the big companies didn't want to let us look at their pictures and take them home and run them, they couldn't prevent us from honking about antitrust, which was then a big issue. So I would get in 25 or 50 kids to watch these pictures from the major companies. And after making a certain number of pictures that really were second features for which we only got paid a flat price, and you could go broke getting a flat price, and I noticed one thing, that there were no teenage pictures. Yes, you'd say there's Tom Sawyer and there's Huckleberry Finn and there's Disney, but those weren't modern pictures. Tom Sawyer was a period picture. Tom Sawyer had nothing to do with modern kids. And Disney's pictures, and he was a genius, were basically for kids. Now, Disney was right that whenever a pre-teenager is in trouble, that's a kid's picture. When we first decided to make the beach party pictures, for example, I looked around for a boy and a girl of teenage age instead of being 30 or 40 or whatever it was, or Joan Crawford. You look at Joan Crawford, Jesus Christ, you know, there isn't a teenager that would have gone to bed with her. That's why she was married to a man of 50-some who died on her very quickly. But anyway, the point was, so we were making the second features, and they only got a flat price. Well, you could go broke doing that. And the major companies didn't want to help, and the exhibitors wanted the flat price second features, but they didn't want us to have anything more. And finally we decided that we couldn't just do it on flat prices, so we made a picture called The Day the World Ended. Now this is a pretty good picture. Really, it cost somewhere, I don't know, $75,000 or thereabouts. Made in 2 weeks. And the story was basically about a girl and her boyfriend and her brother. And they're out in the rural area walking one day, and there's a sudden atom bomb. We used a great deal of pseudoscience in all of these pictures, you know. And as a result of the bomb, it was an instant mutation. And he became 7 feet tall and with 3 eyes. And the 3 eyes we rationalized were a result of the fact that the primordial man had the 3rd eye, see? And he looked better anyway. So he sees her, she sees him, but she only sees a monster, and she collapses. So we had hired a little guy who's an actor who had a reputation for making monsters. So he agreed to make a rubber monster of this 3-eyed guy who was 7 feet tall for $500, which was a lot of money to us. And I kept calling him every day because the shooting schedule was 2 weeks. I kept calling him every day and saying, how's it coming along? And he'd say, it's coming, it's coming. And he wouldn't let me see it. And finally we shot it at a restaurant which had a pond where you fished every day. And he brought it around, and we had a 7-foot-tall guy who would wear the outfit. And what we didn't realize is that that guy that was made the monster was 5'3", that he made it to fit himself. And now he had to carry a girl who weighed 40 pounds more than he did. And the question was, how the hell do you do that? In those days, you know, we had to use ingenuity instead of money. So we lined it up so that the body was this way, and there were people on both ends holding him up, and you couldn't see them. See? This picture was a big success, as a matter of fact. We And we had another picture made, The Phantom from 10,000 Leagues. And we were going to put our two pictures together so we would get a single percentage price, because we couldn't get along between the second feature prices. And we were making youthful pictures that were really bringing in the crowds, but we weren't getting paid for it because we were being paid off as second features. So we said, we've got two pictures, we'll put them together. And of course, the exhibitors said, we don't want you like that. And the motion picture executives from the big companies said, you play AIP pictures and we won't play you. And for 3 months, we didn't make a single sale. And I want to tell you, it looked pretty grim. And finally, we made a sale because we got a date, I think it was Chicago. Now, the thing about it was, though, there was a newspaper strike. And in those days, they didn't advertise motion pictures on television. So how the hell were we going to get publicity for it? Well, we hired 2 flatbed trucks, and we set up a tableau on each one of them. Now, you realize this is December. And we had a girl dressed in gossamer satins, and she was advancing on the flatbed truck, and in front of her, leering at her and making a grab, was a 3-eyed monster from the one picture or the one from the other, and advancing behind to protect her were 2 lifeguard types wearing very little clothes. Now, if you think that isn't cold as hell in Chicago in December, with sleet, rain, and so on and so forth, but it got us the kind of attention that we wanted on television for nothing. And we were off and running, thank God. And that's what you had to do in those days. We discovered a lot of people, really, in that sense. Cher, I knew her husband, and he put up the money to make her first picture long before she was really known on television. It was called Chastity, which became the name of the kid when they finally had the kid. Scorsese, I used to make lecture tours around, first of all because I had been a debater in high school and in college, and secondly because that's the way that I got to go to film schools and search out the people that I thought had talent and were making good student films. And at NYU, there was this chap Scorsese, who's become one of the best directors of all time, and I hired him to do Boxcar Bertha, which is a real-life story of a woman being chased by the police on boxcars. And we brought Scorsese out. I don't think Scorsese had ever been west of the Hudson River. He knew plenty of gangsters in New York. It was not that his family were that way, but they lived in the Italian area there. And he did the picture, and we hired a number of local actors to be extras and also do heavy work. And apparently we weren't paying him enough. Roger was the director on that. And Roger was off in New Orleans when these local guys decided they weren't being paid enough, and in a bar which we were shooting in, they threw everybody except Scorsese, the director, out. It's true. They threw all the actors and all the rest of the crew out and demanded a greater price. Roger wasn't around. Finally, at the end of the day, I get this quivering voice. Well, actually, one of the other guys crew guys called and said they're holding him. And I said, put Scorsese on. And he says, for God's sake, Sam, get me out of here. So we doubled their price and they finished the picture. It's the kind of thing you went through in those days. See? Mind you, I think it was easier in many ways than labor is now. And I am pretty sure that we're heading for a lot of labor problems in the next year or two. But as it was, we made these second features, and we realized finally, I was a picture buff, and I used to get 25 to 50 people, kids, in to see the pictures, to judge what they liked. And I realized that there really were no teenage pictures being made. Not that the teenagers wanted, because nobody thought about the teenagers. Disney did preteen age pictures. You occasionally had something like Old Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn, but that was not the teenager. So, and I realized that one night when we ran a Joan Crawford picture, who was now about 45, and about 50 people, maybe half of them girls, said, my God, she must be older than my mother. And she's playing a teenager. And it gave me the clue to what made the whole difference between being a second feature maker and a top feature maker. And that was get teenagers into pictures and get the teenagers to come. Teenage pictures hadn't been made for teenagers. And it was just about that time that the whole teenage world was about to rocket in music with the Beatles and the others. And styles for teenagers. A hearing aid which seems to keep whistle while you work instead of telling me what's going on.
He wants to know about some of the poster artists and publicity artists who worked for AIP and how you worked with them.
Well, we had the best. I want to tell you, there were exhibitors. We used to send out these posters in advance, just advance copies. As a matter of fact, after we took Annette, because Disney used to have a all-inclusive contract with Annette. And she not only would do a picture a year with the absent-minded professor or so on, playing a 13-year-old girl or whatever it was, but she would be the Mickey Mouse Club. And they decided one year not to do the Mickey Mouse Club anymore, so some thrifty guy in the Disney office didn't make up an exclusive contract. So I rushed in where angels fear to tread and made this deal with her and let her be 19 years old, which is really what she was. As a matter of fact, about that time, I strongly suspected that her body, which I didn't examine personally, was such that they probably were pressing her breasts against something or other, so she could look like 12 years old when she was really 19. And once she got a chance to be 19, she never made another 12-year-old picture. Disney called me up, though, And he said, "What are you doing to my little girl?" And I said, "What do you mean, your little girl?" He says, "Annette." He'd gotten hold of a copy of a girl who was playing a bosomy bikini girl. I said, "That's not Annette. Annette is not going to wear that." See, but I know that when later on we ran what's the picture?
One of the beach party pictures?
Yeah, one of the beach party pictures.
Beach blanket bingo? Beach blanket
How'd
bingo?
you know?
Oh, I don't
Yeah. Beach blanket bingo, which said when 500 boys meet 500 girls on beach, 500 blankets, or something like that. See, he got offended at that. I said, "Don't worry about it, Joe." And so that was the point. Anyway, the point really, in a sense, was like you did have Mickey Rooney playing Andy Hardy. And this is a typical teenage picture. Now, Andy Hardy was a teenager, and his father was Louis Stone. If any of you remember Louis Stone, he was a tall, austere judge by profession. And Mickey would say, "Let's go and do such and such." And Louis Stone would say to his son, "Don't do that, you get us all into trouble." And then Mickey would say with his friends, "We'll never get you into trouble." Naturally, got him into trouble. He couldn't get out of trouble. He came back to his father and told his father, and his father said, "Okay, I'll get you out of trouble." And he would pat his son on the head, and every adult in the audience creamed. That's the way they want to treat the kids. Those are not teenage pictures, those were lectures. And that's exactly what most teenage type pictures are supposed to be. So we made, I was a teenage...
Werewolf? Werewolf?
Werewolf. I was a teenage Frankenstein, a teenage caveman. The word teenager had never been used. And yet at the same time, this is just when the Beatles and the others were coming up, when styles were coming up. And this made a big difference in the motion pictures. And even today, it's a fertile field for motion pictures. Anyway, I've done enough talking. Anybody have any questions?
Right there in the front.
Wait, did I answer the question? What was the question?
The question was, do you think, did you enjoy working with the AIP, artists and poster makers, and did their work help the films?
Oh, sure.
There you go.
Of course. Look, those posters today, I wish I had a collection of posters left. I have some, but not enough. Those posters were terrific. When we made this new deal with HBO, do you think anybody looked at the pictures? They looked at the posters. This is a business that looks at posters. It's not a... Sometimes I don't think they read the scripts. Not HBO, they do.
Right there?
How was it making the Amityville horror? Did you enjoy making that movie?
What?
Any memories of making the Amityville horror?
Well, I would go away periodically to Mexico, like at Christmas time, and I would go in and get a bunch of books to read. And I went in this one time, and I got a number of books, and a chap who ran the bookstore says, "I got a book here that everybody says make a great picture." I said, "What is it about?" "Well, it's about a horror house." I said, "I'm not interested. I'm going off. I'm on my postman's sabbatical." he kept pressing me, and so I finally said, put the book in, I'll take it. So I took it home with about 30 other books, because I don't read a second chapter in a book if I don't think I'm going to like the book. Anyway, and I left that on the table, and my daughter came over while we were gone, and she picked it up, and when I came back, she said, Daddy, that will make a great picture. And that was Amityville Horror. That was the book. And that made a hell of a picture.
And it was a big success too, right?
What?
Money-wise?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that was a... of course, Amityville Horror became... it was the biggest picture we had at the time.
Anybody else? Oh, right there.
In the mid-'60s, AIP started making some really, really cheap films with Larry Buchanan released directly to television. How did that come about?
The movies that Larry Buchanan made for you in Texas, what was he like, and how did his movies come about?
Well, what happened was that we made a number of pictures, and it came time to put them on television. But we didn't really have enough yet at that point. And so I had met Larry, and he'd made a couple of pictures. In fact, he had made one about Marilyn Monroe, which we distributed for him, as a matter of fact. And he was working in Texas, and he was working very cheap. So I made a deal with him that we needed a bunch of pictures fast. And so he said, well, I see some of your pictures. Let me have those scripts, and I'll change them enough so they're different. And so he made about 10 pictures for me for about $37,000 apiece. Now, you got to admit, that's not very much money. Even in those days. And he did a good job. And of course, he did recently, he's done some other pictures. I'm still handling some pictures for him. He's a good man.
Have you seen every AIP movie?
What?
Have you seen every AIP movie?
Of course. Some of them I've forgotten now. There's one of them that my wife loved. What the hell was the name of it? Angel, Angel, Down We Go. It had Jennifer Jones in. And Jennifer Jones had been a big star. When I ran the picture for my wife and she liked it, I knew we were in trouble. Really. Out of the 500-some pictures I've been involved in, I don't think she's seen more than 100. And whenever she liked one, I made a prayer for the dead. But she's a great woman.
Right down, yeah?
Mr. Arkhoff, do you feel any sense of pride or bragging rights having unleashed Mel Gibson on the United States?
How do you feel about having discovered Mel Gibson?
I feel good. I feel good about that. We discovered a lot of people. Mel Gibson.
Jack Nicholson?
Jack Nicholson. I'll tell you a story about Roger Corman. Jack Nicholson, he first was in The Raven. Kind of a pretty boy at that time. See, he's gotten over that. And he had this role in The Raven, and The Raven had, of course, Vincent Price, Boris Karloff. I think Peter Lorre was in that one too. Mm-hmm. And of course, here was Jack Nicholson, the ingenue, you might say. And okay, Now, we always threw a wrap party after the pictures. My wife would bring down some corned beef and this and that and so on, and my sister-in-law, and we'd have a wrap party. You know, we didn't, none of this high-class catering stuff, you know, this is running the family. And I noticed that the work, the sets were not taken down. Now, normally they would have been taken down by that time. And I got suspicious about it. So I came down on Monday, and there was Roger, who had done The Raven, and the placard said, what was it?
The Terror.
The Terror.
Mm-hmm.
No, we didn't have the Terror, see? And the son of a gun at Roger, whenever he saw he said he liked, he had to make another picture with it. There would be one picture that we'd be making together and another one he'd be making on his own. And then he would bring it to me to buy. And he saw me there, you know. And that day he had Boris Karloff and so on. And he was directing Boris at that time. And he looked up and he saw me, and for an instant, his eyes quivered. Just an instant. Roger's very resourceful. And then he came over and said, unnecessarily, what are you doing here, Sam? I said, well, we're making this picture, aren't we, Roger? The Terror? And that was one of the ways that those extra pictures got made. I finally said to Roger, okay, make a second picture, but hey, you have to bring it to us before you can sell it to anybody else. And also, you got to change the sets a little bit so it doesn't look like a direct imitation. Roger's a very resourceful guy.
Questions? Well, way in the back, right there. Memories of Vincent Price.
What?
Vincent Price.
Vincent Price was a terrific human being. A pain in the ass, but a terrific human being. But he was a terrific human being. He was a great cook. He was a great actor. He had a knowledge of art. He even was a sales purchaser of art for the whole Sears Roebuck chain. He was really an amazing man. And he didn't think he was going to like being horror, you know. He did standard kind of roles in his earlier career, and they were pretty good roles, but they really weren't great roles. And he really hit his zenith as a horror actor. He was, but one thing about him, Roger did about the first 6 Poe pictures, and then he got tired of making Poe pictures. So we started to make them over in England. And so Vincent was doing one. By this time, he had increased his weekly maintenance allowance to about $3,000 a week, which should have been plenty at those days to live in the best of London. And he kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And finally one day I'm there, and I call him up and I say, I've got your next script. He says, drop it off, because he knew I was going back to LA. So I got into the chauffeur car and gave him the address, and we drove into the seediest part of London, absolutely the seediest part. I said to the driver constantly, where in the hell are we going? I mean, what are we doing down here? And finally we get in front of a particularly seedy place, and that's the hotel he's in. And I walk in, I say, is it possible Vincent Price lives here? And the guy says, yes. So I called up Vincent, and he says, come up. And I did, and it was a dingy room. I said, for God's sakes, Vincent, you're getting $3,000 a week. I said, why are you doing this? He says, because I'm buying art. And he was. See? He was a terrific guy. And he was one of a kind in many ways.
All right, we got a question back there. You've mentioned Joan Crawford a couple of times. Did you ever think of putting her in one of your movies? Maybe your horror movies? Maybe a spoof or any kind of horror picture or any picture at all. Did you ever think of using Joan Crawford?
I would only have used her as a grandmother. And she would never have taken the role, nor the pay that I would have paid.
Okay, right there.
I was wondering if there's a picture you remember of your career that maybe you look at it on television or something and you say, that's a pretty good picture. Or I actually really enjoyed something that you were immensely proud of.
Any one of your pictures in particular that you look back on with a lot of pride?
Well, our biggest problem was to be able to get enough genres. Now, we were one of the first companies to mix genres. You know, we'd have comedy and horror together. The old Universal horror pictures didn't. They had older actors for the most part, and so on. We would mix the genres and so on. When we could find a new genre or something open up a field, it was like being able to tap into a new oil well. So the best thing you had was that when the Beach Party picture clicked, you knew you could make a certain number of them, another dozen of them or whatever. When the Edgar Allan Poe's worked, you could make a dozen of them. When the pictures on the Wild Angels, you could make more. Those were always the best moments, to be able to feel that you could count on using the same genre, but you'd have to keep mixing it up all the time. And the majors were not making those pictures themselves in many cases, but they were getting independents to make them, and everything we did they would copy, so you'd have to keep changing.
Mm-hmm. What does the Z in Samuel Z. Arkhoff stand for?
It stands for Zechariah. I was named after two prophets, apparently two relatives, which is a Jewish habit. You can only name them after dead ones, see? And so my father was an immigrant from Russia, and when he went down to record me in the birth certificate of Webster County, Iowa, he gave him the name Shmuel Zahariah. And of course nobody knew what the hell that was. Finally somebody told him that was Samuel, and then they remembered Zachary Taylor, you know, who was a president in the United States, if you didn't know. So, I don't know if I answered the question or not. I don't forgot the question.
You answered it. Yeah, right there. What's the big trick to making a successful, likable movie? Is it the casting, the script, a combination? What's the most important thing? Well,
there are a number of things that are equally important. The first one is make sure you know who in the hell you're making the audience. Now, on the plane the other day coming here, they ran a picture called Boiler Room. I had heard about this picture, hadn't seen it. It's a pretty good picture. But who in the goddamn hell was it made for? I mean, it was about a bunch of young guys who wanted to get rich quick, which is perfectly good, and who did all kinds of things that were illegal and so on and so forth. Who was the audience? You can't make a picture without an audience. One of the reasons why, for example, very few dope pictures ever made any money was because who would go to see them? Not the dopers, and certainly not the people who hated dope. No, I mean, just think about it. It's so damned ridiculous that they make pictures, and if you want to be arty-farty, be arty-farty, but they use your own money.
Right there. Thank you. Did you ever work with writers Charles Beaumont and Richard Matheson and have any memory of them?
Oh, yeah, sure. Richard Matheson wrote a number of the Poes and others, and Beaumont did too. Beaumont died, I think, early. No, we used both of those writers. They were both very good.
Anybody? Yeah, yep. Oh. Did you ever work with Mamie Van Doren?
No, she did a couple of high school pictures when High School Confidential, I think.
Yeah,
she did.
Zugsmith pictures, I think.
No, we had, we never used, we had nothing against her, but we never used her. We used, what's her name?
Which
a number
movie?
of times.
Marla English?
Well, we used Marla English.
Jane Mansfield? Which movie?
Yeah, we did. Although my mother came out to California to live, and she bought an apartment house, and she lived in one of them, and she rented out some. And one day she said to me, there's a girl who's moved into an apartment with her husband, and she wants to be an actress. I said, for God's sake, don't tell me about another actress. It turned out to be Mansfield.
Jane Mansfield?
Yeah.
Right there?
You were saying earlier about Vincent Price, seems a great guy, but was a little bit, how was he a little bit?
You mentioned before Vincent Price was a little bit of a pain, and he wonders in what way.
Well, he
It won't leave this room.
it won't even get out in this room.
Catch him in the bar later. All right, in front row. Mario Bava?
Mario Bava could have been as great a director as Hitchcock. His misfortune was that he was born in Italy, which didn't really appreciate horror. When I saw the first time I saw a Bava picture, and it was peculiar circumstances because I was in Rome looking at pictures, and it was the season, the spring season, when they turned, in those days they used to turn the heat off and make such air conditioning as they had. And so if it got unusually cold, you could sit and freeze. And it was one of those freezing days, early in the morning, when I saw what became, I think, Bloody Sunday.
Black Sunday.
Black Sunday. And I tell you, that guy is good. He was able to work his tricks in the camera. Now, he wouldn't have to do that today. You can do it, by a lot of different means. But he worked in the camera. He was good. And we brought him over a number of pictures and had him do it, so on and so forth. He was a very good man.
Anybody over on this side? No? Okay, how about over here? Are we out of questions? Oh, no, there you are, I'm sorry.
One last one. Were you ever on the set of Force 10 from Navarone? Did you get to mingle with Robert Shaw, Harrison Ford, and Edward Fox?
Force 10 from Navarone, Robert Shaw, Harrison Ford, any memory of that?
Well, I made it. It was shot over in Europe, as I remember.
Yugoslavia, he says.
And I was over there for a day or so. I met all of them, but it was a pretty good picture, actually.
If you were a young lawyer today, would you want to get into the picture business? Is it the way it is now?
Well, you do what you have to do when you want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
The point about it is we all reach out for success as we can find it. It changes depending on where you are and when you are. I have a son now who, I got to tell you, now he's doing more work than I am on these new pictures. He says, he doesn't say this to me officially, but he says to his sister, Dad's growing old. Of course I'm growing old. But the point about it is, the viewpoints change as you get older. Your attitudes change. So you have to do what you can do at the time you do it. There's no, I think I've been lucky in a way. But I also think that I pushed. And when we had a successful picture, I didn't do what a lot of other young guys do, who get a successful picture and they immediately buy a big new house and a yacht and get a new woman and all the other stuff. That is unmitigated bullshit. The point is, I had one wife, I loved her, and I love her, and I've been a good father in that sense, and I've been lucky besides. So there you go.
Samuel Z. Arkhoff, everybody.
Well, thank you very much. And if I can keep going till I'm 100, I hope.